While the restriction list that just happened in Japan here might not be the most satisfying in terms of the cards being restricted or balancing the format, it might be better than we expect, and there's actually quite a few cards that are on the watch list right now, especially for standard. So today's video, we're going to take a look at the actual PDF that came attached with the restriction list this time around, where they basically break down all of the things that are on the watch list, why they hit the cards they hit, as well as the explanation for all of the different formats. But before we do that, make sure you're subscribed, because I'm trying to reach 100k and I need your help to do that. So please make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, and if you like the video, what I do, consider dropping a like, a comment, or if you want to support the channel in other ways, consider also becoming a YouTube channel member. But with all that out the way, let's get into the video and take a look at this lovely PDF on the Vanguard website. So this is the July edition of the restriction list, because they go into effect on July the 1st here in Japan, and it begins with standards. Of course, all of the data is sourced from the Vanguard Championship Deluxe 2023, all of the qualifiers that have been taking place across the country, and the first thing they talk about is Gandiva. So Gandiva, of course, is a deck that a lot of people expected to get hit because of its very strong participation and showing and top rate and everything. And so the Gandiva explanation is the following. So they say that essentially the usage of the deck has been increasing since it released. So, you know, it's pretty obvious it's been the most brought deck for quite a while. It's also because it's very cheap in Japan too. I know it's not as cheap in English, but it is very cheap in Japan. And because it's been the most used deck in all of the qualifiers, they are saying that they're going to put a Gandiva on the watch list, because while it's not topping at an exceptional rate, it is slowly increasing. So they're going to put on the watch list. I imagine that if it's going to get hit, it's going to be Best Harvest that is going to lose, which is funny because it's getting your PR reprint with an alt art, so that's kind of funny. But so that's basically Gandiva here. Next up is Chronojet. So here they reflect about the previous restriction, so basically where they restricted Swirler and GG. And so they said that the usage rate of Jet has decreased as a result of the restriction, and because the topping rate of Jet is also not exceptional, they're not going to add any more restrictions. So Jet is at a good level. For you guys in English, it might not seem like it because you just came out of a meta where Jet was one of the best decks, but in the DBT 10 meta, like, Jet is definitely not. Like, Jet is definitely has a rough matchup against Gandiva and some of the other like mask decks as well, so it definitely is a bit of a struggle. Now up next, of course, is my own favorite, Eva. So of course this is once again the same as Jet, where they reflect on the previous restriction list, basically saying that the usage has decreased ever since the restriction was put into place, and it's also not topping at a crazy like special rate either. So it's been topping here and there, but nothing too crazy. But because this deck has been supported, like this is the typical Bushiroad line, like because this deck got support in the most recent set, they don't know whether there's like any need to unrestrict cards or do any other kind of adjustment. So they're going to watch as the environment develops after DBT 11, and then after that make some decisions. So I feel like maybe we'll get Combine Rusher back eventually, but definitely not now. So maybe in the September restriction list, who knows. And then up next is Messiah. So of course, all of the people that are screaming that the game is doomed because Luard is coming out, they all say that Messiah and Jet are the best decks. Everything else on this list doesn't exist, according to these people. Gandiva doesn't exist, Eva doesn't exist, there's Willista out here, doesn't exist, nothing exists except for Jet and Messiah, because Messiah, of course, is a strike deck, so it must be the best. But lo and behold, the explanation might tell you something different according to Bushiroad. So Messiah, after its release, was used actually very heavily. It's a very, very popular deck. But as they increased the number of different decks that were present in tournaments, the usage rate of Messiah has increased, so not going to do any restrictions. Now, they don't really say specifically, they don't explain it, when I wish they did, but Messiah has a horrible Gandiva matchup, because if you don't have any board at the start of your turn, that means your alter ego Messiah doesn't do anything. You cannot lock anything of your own, and you can't lock your opponent's stuff either, which means that your stride setups suck, and you also, you know, cannot remove your opponent's stuff either. So the support in the most recent set does help with that, but is it enough? Who knows? So I think it's definitely a little bit of a shaky one here. Alter ego definitely doesn't deserve to be restricted or anything, but I feel like they could have said more specifically that it's like after Gandiva was introduced, this has been struggling. But of course, they're not going to say that. And then next is Willista. So for those of you that have not been keeping up with the Japanese meta, Willista is one of the best decks now. And so they basically talk about Willista, saying that it's been the second most used deck 2 times in a row in the Deluxe qualifiers. And while it's not topping in like a crazy amount, it is still relatively high. And so if this continues to be the case, they will restrict it. So essentially, or not necessarily they're going to restrict it, but they're going to keep an eye on it. and then potentially make changes in the future. So that's basically saying that Willista is on the watch list. So right now the two that are on the watch list are Gandiva and Willista because they perform exceptionally well and are definitely very strong decks. And then finally, the culprit, the one that actually got hit, is Ebisu. So Ebisu, of course, is by far, while not the most used deck, it has been used a bit more than before, and its topping rate is twice that of the average. That, in my opinion, is, you know, if you want to keep a balanced game, I think that is a bit problematic if a deck is topping twice as much as its next best thing. So the other thing that I've noticed when looking through the results, which they've also picked up on, is that the winning teams are also almost always having an Ebisu in it. So Ebisu has actually won basically every single deluxe, almost every single one. And because of that, they've chosen to do the following restrictions, which is to restrict the Fujin Raijin Grade 2 to 1. So their explanation for why it's restricted, or how it's restricting it, is basically you have a turn 2 move where Fujin Raijin lets you retire your opponent's rear. So if they try to aggro you, you can just remove their board. So you can do a lot of retire, and then Ebisu's effect also retire. So you have more retire than initially planned, I guess. And because it searches out a grade 1 in the deck, that means that with a monster box, you can swap the grade 1 out with a PG, as well as swap it out for Anastasia that goes into your monster box, which is infinite countercharge. So basically they say, this card does too much, therefore we're going to restrict it. I think they should have been more strict. I think they should have hit more cards for Ebisu, but they really want this deck to stay alive. They want the Monster Strike kids that love this deck to stay happy, I guess. So I think, how much more will it take? The Japanese players are saying that Ebisu is still going to be very strong despite this. I think it's still going to be, like, they're saying it's like a tier 2, tier 2.5. I think it's still tier 1. I think it's still going to be an insane deck. I don't think this changes. They said the same thing when Anastasia went to 1. I know it's going to be the same thing again. But that is for standard. So all the restrictions on the watch list. So the key takeaways are that Gandiva, Eva, and Messiah aren't performing well enough to have any restrictions, so they're chilling. Gandiva is basically on a watch list, Willista's on the watch list, and Ebisu had to be hit. So that's basically what that is. V Premium, so they reflect on the results of the tri-regulation tournament because there's no other tournaments for V Premium at all. So for V Premium, they say there was no particularly highly used clan in the Daibangasai tri-regulation cup, so no changes. That's it. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what the Western meta is. Prisms are still full power in Japan, by the way. And I think they won the event too, but that's not a problem. So I guess it's fine. Goes to show how dedicated they are to V Premium. And I've said this before, but I think V is a cool format. But even though I'm not a big fan of V myself, but it's very obvious that, like, with this much attention, this much effort, it feels like they're sunsetting the format slowly. Like, Japan doesn't really have events for it at all. Barely anyone plays it. English participation numbers for V has been really, really down as well. So I feel like in terms of like official tournament support, V might not go on for another year. Like, it'll still be a format. They'll probably still make promos for it like they do now and make like shop tournaments for it. But they might just do like premium shop tournaments and not split it into V and P anymore. So we'll see. We'll see. What do you think about that? Do you think that's what would that imply for your local community? But moving on, because there's nothing else really to talk about for V, there's premium, because there is a premium hit in this, and it's like a infinite loop actually. So the hit is actually to Karenus. So that's a old grade 1 from GBT 13. So they basically say that in general, there was no highly used clan in tri-regulation, although I think there was a lot of Meg Colony, but you know, that's besides the point. But they said that there is a problematic card in Gold Paladin, which will be restricted. So Karenus is banned, so it's completely banned. And their explanation is the following. So you can stride Spear X to get Generation Break, and then use cards that can restand Karenus, like Assalta, and then you can also use cards that can superior call rearguards like Laudine, and you end up with rearguards with basically infinite power and only stand triggers in your deck to the point that you'll have multiple attacks at basically infinite power. And you basically have cards with power that can only really be stopped with Sentinels, and so because of that, they are also choosing to ban it, because it can also be active from turn 3 going first. So it's a pretty versatile infinite combo. I saw it in being played at a tournament, but I didn't think it was necessarily that big of a problem or such a crazy combo to necessarily be restricted. But it is what it is. It is an infinite loop, but funnily enough, the GB8's infinite loop is still there. But I guess you can't do that on turn 3. Maybe that's where they draw the line. If an infinite loop can be done on turn 3, that's where it's a problem. So that's basically the result for the premium one. And then basically everything else is like, thank you for supporting the game. Like, please look out for future tournaments, and we'll continue to, make sure that you have a fun playing field in all of the different regulations, and look forward to the next regulation list that's going to happen in September. So that is it. That is all of the restrictions that they made for the 3 different formats. What do you think? Do you think that they should have been harsher? Are there some hits in V you feel like should have been done? Are there more hits in premium that should have been done? Don't forget the restrictions are different between Japan and English, which I kind of wish they weren't necessarily. I feel like I prefer if it was all the same. And at least for standard, I feel like probably on the English side, they will hit Swirler GG and also combine Russian Eva, because clearly the results from the Japanese side show that those were effective hits. So chances are we will see those restrictions happen in the English one relatively soon whenever it gets announced. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on these restrictions, as well as their explanation and the watch list too. Like, are you worried about Geneva losing Best Harvest? Do you think it'll still be fine without it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But anyway, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.